I feel doubly bad that you're all held captive to a Zoom screen today because it is absolutely lovely outside, as I'm sure most of you know, because you can all see outside your windows and many of you are at home. But I'm grieving a little bit, especially right now, because I just came back from a short little mini vacation with my adult boys. We were up kayaking on the Pine River up in kind of the middle part of Michigan, which is absolutely gorgeous, and didn't tip over once, but I did realize that I'm not as young as I used to be. But it was a lot of fun to be outdoors and to just enjoy things. And so it's hard to be back here in reality today. So I apologize to you all for keeping you here, but hopefully you'll learn some things today that are really practical. We're going to try and make this as just straightforward and as hands-on as possible. The downside is because we're not all in the same room, I can't see all of you, and especially I can't see all of you because there are a lot of you, but also because I'm trying to keep my screen clear so that I can see my presentation. So as Amanda already said, if you have questions, throw them into the chat, and then Amanda, just dive in and let me know, and I'll stop, and feel free, Amanda, to just jump in wherever you need to. Whenever I take a breath, I'm more than happy to have you just dive right in. So so that's kind of the background. My personal background is I teach evaluation, among other things, at Andrews University in the social work School of Social Work. And so I do this stuff all the time. I also do evaluations for community groups, including the United Way and some other organizations. And so this is kind of second nature for me, but I realize it's not second nature for most of you. And so I don't want you to feel like this is overwhelming or scary. If you were here for the first presentation that we did last month, it might be helpful for you to just see a really quick review. And so here's what I'm going to do today, assuming I can get my forward button to actually work. There we go. So what we're going to try and do today is just a really quick review of last session, and that includes, I believe I sent out through Amanda the PowerPoints that we did last time and some more information that you can refer back to as you need to, but I'm just going to hit some highlights just really, really fast so that you can be reminded, and it sets the context for today. But most of the first part of today's session is going to be how to make an easy and free online survey, which many people just need to have some basic tools and some basic ways of learning how to do these things. And so I'll show you how to do that. And then the second half, after we take a break, will be how to run a focus group. And those are different sorts of skills that require a different sort of approach, but they're a different, they both address different ways of doing evaluation. And so these are the two kind of most common ways that you can collect information. And so I just wanted to set those up for you today so that you could have some basic information about it. Okay. So just as a reminder, the logic model we talked about last time we met, and just as a really, really fast overview, remember that your resources in that middle black or that left black box are the things that you bring: the money, the staff, the training, all of the things that you put into your program. Your activities, the next box over, are the things you do. They're your actual program, your intervention. And then you have these outputs. People get served, so it's the number of people served, or the number of hours that people were trained, or the number of activities that you provided, or the number of blankets you handed out. I mean, it's anything that you can kind of count are outputs. And then the outcomes, which we're most interested in for evaluation, are those things that you can actually show changed. And the way I like to talk about outcomes is something either increased or something decreased. You're trying to make a difference in people's lives, and so you're trying to improve certain things, or in some cases you might be trying to reduce certain things, and outcomes are a way that you measure those. And so ultimately we care the most about outcomes in evaluation because those kind of show us, did you actually make a difference? Did change actually happen? So that's the basics of the logic model. And then the far right box is really your kind of long-term, did you make a difference in the community? And we don't worry much about that in the things that we're doing here. Now, just another quick reminder, the difference between process and outcome evaluations. And again, I went over this in a lot more detail last time, but just remember that a process evaluation is how you're evaluating your program as you're going along. It's how you know that the program is doing what you want it to do as it's being delivered. So it's in process. That's why the word process evaluation. So it's the mechanism for assessing the delivery of your program, not measuring the output of your program. So when we think about the purpose of process evaluations, we're basically thinking about how to compare whether your program is being delivered across the staff that you're doing or the sites that you're doing. Is it happening equally, or is it doing well as you're going along? Some places might have certain kinds of staff where things are going really well, and other places it might not be going so well. And so sometimes you're trying to just see what the difference is, or maybe you're trying to link the specific methods of your program delivery to your outcomes, but it means that you're trying to check that over time and you're trying to see how it's going. You're trying to provide information for improving the program elements on the way. It's not, think of a process evaluation as like on your camera phone, it's like the video where you're watching something as it goes through time and you're trying to evaluate how things are going. Whereas an outcome evaluation on the right side of the page, that's when you're looking at a snapshot in time. That's when you're taking your camera and you're taking a picture at the end of your trip where you're saying to yourself, all right, this is where we're at right now, and this is what we've accomplished. And so the purpose really of an outcome evaluation is to tell whether your program created the short-term outcomes that you had hoped to achieve. And that's what you're really trying to measure. And so process evaluations help you on the way to know if you're doing well. Outcome evaluations let you know if you've made progress, if you've made accomplished the short-term goals that you're interested in. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that for right now. Now, one other thing I would like to say is that when you're trying to find surveys, don't always feel like you have to create a survey from scratch. I'm a big believer in not recreating the wheel, because when you recreate the wheel, you're wasting your time if somebody else has already done the work for you. So before you start working on any survey, see if you can do this as a Google search. First, enter your topic into the search bar. So for instance, let's say you're an agency that's dealing with homelessness issues. All right, well, type in homelessness in your search bar. Or if you're working in food insecurity, then type in food insecurity, or whatever the specific thing is that you're trying to change. Type that into the search bar, followed by the word survey. So you'd say homelessness survey, or homelessness questionnaire, or homelessness instrument. And I like to use all three of those because different things pop up depending on how they've been cataloged by whoever's saving things. So put in your topic, then put in survey or questionnaire or instrument, but don't use the word free, because whenever you use the word free, there's a whole bunch of junk that automatically comes up where people are trying to sell you stuff, and you don't want that. What you're usually looking for when you're trying to screen out what's good from what's not good is to trust those sources that end with addresses like .edu. That means it's from an educational institution like a university or a college. .gov is generally government information, and that could be state, it could be local, but or it could be federal, but all of those are generally good and reliable places where surveys can be found. And then .org can be good. It's not as good because sometimes it can be a little bit more tainted with a particular bias or particular organizational pitch, but what you're trying to most avoid is .com. Anything with .com, don't even open it or look at it, because they are trying to make money and they're trying to sell you something, and that's not something that you want to do. So again, search by the topic area, add the word survey, questionnaire, instrument, don't use the word free, and then trust those resources. And that's a really good way to see if you can find anything out there. And generally, most things, if they're copyrighted, they will say that they're copyrighted, and you'll, then have to ask for permission and or have to pay for the survey or whatever else. But in most cases, you'll find that things on the internet, they have posted things there and you can use them because they have posted them for common use. Generally, if it's not copyrighted, then if they're putting it on the internet, they're expecting that people are going to use it in some way, and you can feel okay about grabbing a certain question and leaving another question out or modifying the question. All of those things are generally okay for you to do as long as it doesn't show that there's a copyright. And I realize that I'm way broadly overgeneralizing. Sometimes what I'll do too is I will send an email to that source and say, hey, is it all right if I use this survey? And they will generally say yes, as long as you reference where you got it from. So that's another thing that you can do as well. Questions that are coming in, Amanda? Should I stop right now?
Nope, the only question that came in is if I will send out the slides, and I will send them out again after this with the recording link. If you do not usually get emails from me, please put your email in the chat box.
Perfect.
That's it.
Okay, so get back to outcomes for a second. This is one more reminder from the last time that we talked. And when you think about what you want to measure, think about what's going to change by the time you're done. Is it 6 months, Amanda, that you're asking people to turn in some sort of a report that says how things are going?
It will be annually in our new.
Annually, that's right. You've moved from 6 month to annually. Yep. Yes, you're very generous and gracious to everyone to make it so that they have less reporting to do, which is lovely. But think about at the end of a year, what did you want your clients to change? Or what did you want your, the folks that you're working with, what did you want to see change? Did you want to see them change an attitude? Or did you want to see them change behaviors? Or did you want to see them change knowledge or skills or the status that they have, the information that they know? Level of functioning, going from lower level to a higher level of functioning. Or in some cases, were they satisfied with the program? In some ways, satisfaction is the easiest to measure, and there are tons of satisfaction surveys out there, but it doesn't generally tell you whether change occurred. It just tells you whether or not people were happy with what you did. And so it's kind of the least useful, but it does give you some information that helps you to know whether or not people are satisfied with what you've been providing. But when you think about change, you're thinking about whether people went more or less in any of these areas. And so when you're thinking about what do you want to measure, you'll think about, okay, what did I want to see change? And then think about those categories and whether or not you want to change something in those areas. They should have resulted from the program that you're doing. So the more specific you can be about your measurements, the more likely you are to see change happen. If you're trying to measure whether or not people are food insecure and you're asking them general questions about whether or not they're satisfied with their food or whether or not they've had enough to eat, that may not answer the question about whether your program is actually effective. So you want to make sure that you're talking about your program and you're measuring the things that you want to see happen and the things you want to see changed. So make sure that they're also measurable. That's so important. Okay, so those are all kind of from last time that we talked and met. And this is now, how do we make an easy survey using Google Forms? So this is where I'm going to transition to the new information. And you'll notice here on my presentation that I've given you two websites. One is the Google Forms website, which I'm about to go to in just a second, and you can just see how to get to it by that link. And then the other one is there's a nice little YouTube tutorial that goes over some of the information that I'm going to go over today. And so if you ever want to double back, I mean, there's always this tutorial, but the other one that you're getting from Google is actually not a Google created one, but it's one that was done by another organization. They did a pretty good job, and it's about 17 minutes. So it's shorter by far than what I'm going to be doing, but it also gives some really good information. So just so you know that that's there as well. Okay, now I'm going to transition here to the actual Google Forms web page. This is if you would have clicked the first link that I just showed you, this is what would come up. You can see google.com/forms/about. We're going to create a new evaluation form, and we're going to do it from scratch, and we're going to select the personal one that takes us to Google Forms. Don't go to Google Workspace for Business. Even if you are a business, that is, you know, they're going to charge you money and you don't need it. It's just not that useful. So stay on the personal side and go to Google Forms. So we hop to Google Forms, and you'll see there are a bunch of ones down here below that I've created, and you want to ignore that. And so probably you won't even see any of that. But the best place to go generally is to go to the one that says blank. And that one doesn't have any forms that have already been created. And that's where I generally like to start. So I'll click on blank. And now I'm just going to get sort of the basic template. And it's pretty straightforward because basically all you're doing is you're just starting with the title of the form. And so let's just say that we're going to, I don't know, let's do something on food insecurity, just because we mentioned that before. So we're going to call this food insecurity survey. And you could say something more about it under form description if you want to. This is a survey, but you can kind of describe it however you need to down below. Now, all we do next is we start out with the creation of our questions. And so here we start out with our untitled question. Okay, so let's say that we want to ask some questions about people's background, like their demographics. Well, a good way to do that is probably, you'll see there's a drop-down menu over here, and there's a whole bunch of different choices you can choose from. Short answer, paragraph form, multiple choice, checkboxes, drop-down. I'm going to go through each one of these and just kind of demonstrate how you would use each one just fairly straightforwardly. And then we'll give you an example of each one that you can see as we're going along. And then you can jump in with questions where you need to. But there's basically only two drop-down areas that you need to be looking at. There's this one right here, which is the drop-down that gives you the type of questions you want to create. And this one over here that allows you to add questions or to import a question from somewhere else if you have one that you like and you want to put it into your form because you've discovered it somewhere else and you don't want to retype it. That allows you to do that. This one allows you to add titles and things. This one allows you to add images. If you want to put in, for instance, your logo from your organization, this will allow you to put your logo in. You can add videos if you want to a survey. So there are all kinds of fun things that you can do, and then you can add sections. And I'll show you each one of these areas as we're going along here. Okay, so let's go through and let's create a few questions just to see how this all plays out. And we're going to start with multiple choice because that's where we most likely are going to find our first sets of questions. We want to know a little bit about people. I'm a big believer in asking just a few things about people that help you then to know who your audience is. And so I don't want to know names because that creates a lack of anonymity. Most people don't want to answer a survey if they don't feel that it's confidential. So usually up at the top, I would say something about confidentiality, and there are a few other things that I might say as well, but that's because I have to do this from a university setting, and I can tell you if you want some other ways in which you can do what's called informed consent and let people know what the information is going to be used for and who's going to have access to it. All of that kind of stuff is usually done at the very beginning. That helps people to feel more confident and comfortable that their results, that their information is not going to be targeted toward them, and it's not going to be used in a way that makes them, discoverable. So that's part of the confidentiality that you start with. But if we're just here to create the questions themselves, what we do is, let's say that we wanted to start with demographics, and it might be helpful if we add a title here. So I'm going to put a title in. And I'm actually going to move this down below. So these things can be moved around. So here I'm going to put in demographics. And that's just a way of kind of setting the category up. So now I'm going to create a question. So I just click on it and I'm going to do a multiple choice question. And I'm going to say, how old are you? And this is multiple choice. And option 1, I can just start typing right in the box and I can say 18 to 21. And then I'll add another option and I'll say 21 to 35. And then maybe I'll say over 35, just because we're only checking with millennials for this survey for some reason. Now, at the bottom, it always says that you can add other. That allows us then to then put an other box in that then somebody can type into and say, I'm 36 and I didn't see my option here. So it allows people to just type in their own response. And when it's multiple choice, remember that only one answer can be given. So multiple choice generally is fairly straightforward. Let's say then you want to add a new question. We've now created the how old are you question. Maybe next we want to do a question about what is your gender. Now this one is nice because this gives you some suggestions. And so you could just take these suggestions right away and select, and all of a sudden you've got this female, male, prefer not to say, or other, which allows people who might respond that they're non-binary or that they're gender fluid or any of the other terms that are a bit more that are emerging that allow people to create an option that maybe isn't in your first category. So that's a really nice way to create something, is you just put in the question and then it starts to create some responses. If you don't like those responses, you can just jump in and type in something new. So that's only a suggested. Now you'll see here that this says required. If you select required, that means that the person who is answering the survey must answer this question before they can go on. Now, there's a lot of really good reasons that you want to use this, but a lot of good reasons why you might not want to use this. A lot of times when people feel like they're forced to answer a question, they might decide, this is stupid, I'm not going to be forced to answer anything I don't want to answer, and then they stop doing your survey, and then you've lost them completely. On the other hand, if it's required, then that means you're going to get responses from everybody who answered the survey for sure. They're not going to accidentally skip it. They're not going to be able to intentionally skip it. You're going to get full responses, but make sure if you turn the required response on that you really want to know the answer to that. Don't just do it to every single one. Otherwise, you run the risk of alienating people and they just don't want to play anymore. So you just got to decide if it's so important that you don't want to make sure that it's skipped. Okay, so we'll take that one back off. Now let's say I want to add one more demographic. I'm really curious because I've never done this before, is if we add what is your ethnicity, if it will give us options. This is always a tricky one. Yeah, they're not bold enough to be willing to give us options. And so generally what I do here, and this is going to be way more complicated than we want to talk about, but I usually just create the most basic of categories. So I might say Black / African American, white / Caucasian, Hispanic / Latino or Latinx, and then I might say You know, you can keep going, but if you get too many and you know that you just don't have that many people within that ethnic group within your area that you live in, the demographic group that you're wanting to find, by creating too many options, you've just made it so that you can't really see your responses as well. And so I tend to leave it in the major categories, and then allow of the other option to be included so that people can type in what they wish. And I realize that this is always tricky because ethnicity is something that people like to self-identify and that people might not want to identify at all. So I would never, ever, ever leave this one as a required response because people will drop off for sure. That's just a given. Okay.
Kurt,
Yes.
we did have one question and 2 comments.
Uh-huh.
Under age, Jeremy asked, shouldn't you use 22 to 35 instead of, I think you right now you have 21 twice.
Yep, you're absolutely right. Good catch. Totally right. You never want to repeat the same number in 2 different categories. You always want to add the next number up. Yeah, and that goes with income levels too. You don't want to say 20,000 to 30,000 and then say 30,000 to 50,000, 50,000 to, you have to make sure that you're going up to that number but not including it. So yes, good catch. Thank you.
All right, and then we had 2 comments. Mary Jo says, love your inclusive options on gender. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mary also said that this could be coordinated with United Way reporting model. And I think that's a fantastic comment. And
Good.
We are still working on that reporting model, but we will definitely be getting that out before the funding cycle begins.
Good. Good. The last thing I'm going to say about demographics, because we could spend a lot of time and I don't want to spend much time on it right now. And I think we talked about it some last week or last time we talked as well, but I always put demographic questions at the end rather than at the beginning, because I find that people are less comfortable answering demographics than most other questions. And so if I put demographics at the end, it's most likely that they'll answer them because those are the last questions and they now feel comfortable about the general survey. And so they're more likely to answer demographics at the end. Okay, so let's say that we're done with our demographics and we're now going to create a new section that's not demographics. So I'll add a new section. And here we're going to go to section 2 and we're going to call this, I don't know, food insecurity. We'll just, something just like that. And then we can put more of a description down below where we say, these are questions that help us to understand how you feel about your own food security. Please answer them as comfortably as you feel. I mean, you can put anything under there that you wish. Okay, now we have a new section and then we're now going to add a question. So we'll go to the top of this little button here and we'll add a question, which has now been added down below. So let's try a few things that aren't multiple choice. Let's say that we wanted to ask a question that needed them to type in a response, but it was going to be really short. So we're going to create short answer. Maybe we ask, when was the last time you skipped a meal? Now we could say yesterday, 2 days ago, last week, this morning, whatever it happened to be, but we're going to leave it as a short answer text because that then allows people to type in, you know, yesterday morning or 2 weeks ago, or I haven't missed a meal in the last month or something like that, but it's something that's really short. It's usually a sentence or less that you can create. Now, let's say that you wanted to ask something that was more detailed. So let's go to the next question. And this time we're going to have a paragraph response because we know that whatever they're going to say, it's going to take a lot longer to say. So it might be something like, describe the main reasons why you couldn't get food. All right. You've created now a paragraph response that allows them to type in as much as they want to. They might type in a few words, they might type in a sentence, they might type in a paragraph. You don't know, but you're giving them the space that they need to create that. Okay, so we've now covered 3 different kinds of options. Let's add a new question. We've done multiple choice, we've done short answer, we've done paragraph. Now let's go to checkboxes. Checkboxes are generally when you want more than one thing to apply. Multiple choice, they can only make one response. If you want them to do multiple responses, then you use a checkbox. So let's say for our checkbox options, we want to say, where do you usually get your food? Option 1, let's say Meyer. Option 2, let's say, I don't know, local gas station. 3 is, I don't know, farmer's market on, well, I'll just say farmer's market. 4, family and friends. Okay, so check all that apply will allow them to select more than one option. So sometimes they might get it at Meijer, sometimes they might get it at the local gas station, sometimes they might get family and friends, or you can do other as well. Again, you can always add other, and I'm a big fan of that because that allows people to add in things that you hadn't thought of. So always put in other, or almost always put in other. Okay, so that's how checkboxes work. Now, let's say that we wanted to add another question, and this time we wanted to select drop-downs. Drop-downs are really useful when you want to make your survey appear to be shorter so that it doesn't take up a lot of space and overwhelm people, or when you have a lot of options, and a drop-down menu just makes sense because you don't want to put all of those options on there. So for instance, whenever you're asked about the month of the year would be a good example. So let's say, what month do you have the most problems getting food? Now, nicely, they selected all of these months. So we have January through December. If I add all, which would make the most sense, it now created that drop-down menu for me. Now we can see all of them right now, but when we actually go to look at our survey, it's going to allow us to click one box, and then the drop-down menu will pop down, and it'll allow us to select January or July or whichever one it is. But this has now created a whole series of things. And this is really nice if you're doing something like age. Let's say you don't want age ranges, you want specific ages from, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and you go all the way up to, 65 or to 90 or whatever you're going to go to. It's a lot. And we don't want to have people wade through all of those. We want to have them be able to roll down and make that selection. So the drop-down menu is really good for that. Okay, let's add another one.
All right, we do have a couple questions.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right. When making a survey, you do have the option to collect emails. Should that practice be used?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I usually like to do is to say at the bottom of the survey, if you would like to provide an email, please send it to the following link or to the following address. Because once you've asked them to add an email, you've then made it so that they're no longer confidential. And so you can request that they give you their email, and generally you can request it in a way. Now you could put it at the bottom of the survey. I suppose that's always possible, and say, if you feel comfortable We promise that we're not going to use this for any, you know, marketing purposes or blah, blah, blah. We're just going to use this for such and such a reason. And if you feel comfortable, please put in your email below. Then that gives people the option to do it or not do it. But some people even feel like that will allow me to be linked to the actual survey and my responses. I don't want people to know. And so if you give people the option to send their email to a different link, or to, you know, please send it to this email. I realize that it's one step more that people have to do, but it just preserves their confidentiality and they're much more likely to do it then.
All right. Do you have to say check all that apply in the body of the question, or does it come up automatically?
That is a good question. I'm trying to remember if that happens on Google Forms, but I'm pretty sure you have to put in parentheses, check all that apply. That's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, so I think if I were to go up to that question again, let's see, where is it here? Where do you usually get your food? I can go back in and modify just by tapping on it. Check all that apply. Yeah, so that's good question. And we'll know for sure if it shows up when we get to the review to see what it looks like, to see whether that shows up or not. But that's a good one to put in there just to make sure.
And then the last question we had was about the time frame for applying for United Way funds for the next cycle. I will go over that at the end of the presentation.
Sounds good. Okay, let's do a few more. Let's say that we want to add a new question, and let's say this time we want to do a little bit, something that's a little bit more complicated. And let's say we wanted to, oh, you can always upload a file. And so I'm not going to show you how to upload a file because basically I'm sure you've done that before. You click on that box and then select from your file menu options, and then that will put it actually into the survey itself. Let's say that we want a scaling question. By scaling, we want to say what's the lowest to the highest. So a linear scale allows us to do that. So we'll select linear scale, and you can see that it sets us up automatically from 1 to 5. Now, I'm a big believer in trying to keep it within 5 points at the most, because if you ask too many, like strongly agree, very, very strongly agree, strongly agree, mostly agree, partly agree. I mean, you could just tie people up in knots. And generally, you don't want that many responses. You want to give people a reasonable number of options, and 5 is usually pretty good. So if my question is, let's say, let's see, let's think about this here. How easy is it to get food from your local grocery store? And so I create very easy, somewhat easy. Hold on, I gotta see what I'm doing here. Oh, sorry. This is 1 is very easy. This should be very difficult because this is 5. Very difficult. Now, let's take a look here. We can actually change our numbers on our scales. We can go from 0 if we wanted to, and we could start with impossible if we'd rather do that. Which would be what a 0 would be. And then the 5, we could certainly go higher than that, but I don't want to. Maybe I want to go, 5 is pretty good. Impossible, and let's say here we want to say very easy. not the greatest scaling, but that allows us then to sort of see on a scale of 0 to 5 whether it's really hard or really easy. And you might ask yourself, all right, is it better to do the negative as a 0 or the positive as a 0? Because I started out with 1 as being very easy, but if we're going to start with 0, we always want to make that the most difficult or the most challenging. And so impossible would be a 0, very easy would be a 5. And then it's going to give us, and I'm going to see if it allows us to see this really quick. We may not be able to see this until we review it at the end, but then you'll be able to see how that goes along the scale. So we'll come back to that and you'll see it in just a minute. Now, the other neat thing is, let's say that you want to duplicate the same question or you want to duplicate a similar question. You could hit duplicate and you can see that you've created the exact same question again. So maybe this time how easy it is to get food from your local, I don't know, farmer's market. So all you have to do is just change a few words and then you've still got the same scale that's been created. So you can make it much easier for you to replicate things. If you decided instead that you wanted to do something where you were using those Likert scales that we talked about last time, remember I gave you a handout, and I believe, Amanda, you sent that out to people. It gives people all of these different options, from strongly agree to strongly disagree, or strongly like to strongly dislike, all kinds of options that you can then go in and choose. But let's say that you wanted to turn this into a strongly agree to strongly disagree. You can also type those options in as well. But the nice thing about the linear scale is it just gives you sort of this line, and then it says on the one end, impossible, on the other end, it says very easy. And so it doesn't give you all of the options in the middle. That's more likely to be used for your multiple choice. So if I wanted to do something that was multiple choice, there it shows it 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 0 is impossible, 5 is very easy, and then people will be able to select those answers. But if I wanted to do a multiple choice, I can easily get food when I need it. That's when you'd create strongly agree. And now we've got all of the options: strongly agree through agree, neutral disagree to strongly disagree. So I can just automatically select that and it creates all of my options rather than just giving me a range along here, which is what I would get with the linear kind of scale. So this then creates it so I then can create or select any of these. And then again, I always want to add other. Okay, we're almost done. Let's do a couple of more. And again, we're starting to get more complicated now. Let's say that we wanted to do a multiple choice grid. And remember, multiple choice means that only one selection can be done per row in this case. So a multiple choice grid allows us to put things across the rows and things across the columns. So the columns will go across the top and the rows will go down the side. So let's create a multiple choice grid. So the rows, remember, are going across. So this is where I might give multiple sorts of questions. So let's say here I want to say ease of getting, well, let's say it differently. How easy is it? I find it easy to get food from the following places. Now in my rows, I might put Meyer, Aldi's, I don't know, Martin's, and Farmer's Market. And across the columns, I might put strongly agree disagree, neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree. Okay, so I've created those. And then when I create a new option, it should show us, this is how it's now set up. I find it easy to get food from the following places. Meyer, strongly agree through strongly disagree. Aldi's, strongly agree to strongly disagree. So you've now set it up so that it's easy to answer each one of these questions because it has the same string, but a different option all the way through. So hopefully that makes sense. And then the same idea is going to happen when I do a checkbox grid. The only difference, and I'm not going to do the checkbox grid because I do it exactly the same way, is that these turn into little squares and it forces people, it allows people to select more than one choice. So similar to what we did up above when we were looking at the difference between a multiple choice and a checkbox, same thing here. This one for multiple choice grid allows people to choose only one option per row, whereas the checkbox grid allows you to choose multiple boxes across multiple rows and columns. So you'll be able to select as many as you want. So that's the only difference between them. You can also put in date, and you can put in time as well as options that people allow, you know, what time they did something or whatever. Okay, we've now created our survey. And let's say that we're pretty much done. Let's see if there's anything else that we need to learn from this. We know how to add questions. We know how to import questions because we might do that if we were looking on our own survey somewhere. We can add titles. We already created a title for one of the sections. We can, if we want to, add an image if we chose to, and I could go in and find a United Way image and put that in there so that it was at the top of the survey. We can add video if we want to, and you know how to add sections. We already did that. So we know how each of those work. You can also, if you want to, customize your theme. So if you go up here, your survey is now pretty well ready. You can say, I'd like to create a different color palette. Instead of this kind of purpley color, I'd like to change it to something that's more in kind of this orangey range, reddish range, I guess. Or I'd like to choose something that's indigo. And so that then changes, you can choose whatever colors. And then you can change your background colors to kind of match lighter or darker options. So allowing you to then just be a little bit more creative. You can even change your font style here. If you want something, I'm a big believer in using basic because it's easier to see and read. If you start using things like decorative, you can see it becomes really difficult to, I can easily get food when I need it. That becomes harder to read. So I'm a big believer in just trying to keep your basic font style because it's just easier for people to deal with. So that's how you change your theme if you wish to. You can also preview your survey. This is where you can test to see how long it takes, or you can test to see if you want to make any changes by just filling out all of the responses. So if I hit preview, it's going to give me exactly what the survey is going to look like when I send the link to somebody. So you can see here's the title, here's the subcategory, how old are you? I'm going to say that I'm over 35. What's my gender? I'm going to say I'll say male, and then I'm going to say white Caucasian. Now I'm at the end of my section, so I'm going to go then to next. When was the last time you skipped a meal? Too long ago to remember. Main reason why you couldn't get food. Car out of gas. But I could type a lot more here, remember, because this is the long form answer. Where do I usually get food? I usually do it at Meijer, but sometimes they do farmers market. So that allows me to check all that apply. And my other would be, I don't know, let's see, where else do I go to? Restaurant, R-A-U-A-N-T. Anyway, you know how to spell restaurant, and I don't apparently. Now, somehow I accidentally left an option 1 in here, so I'm going to have to go back and I'm going to have to clean that up and delete that when I come back through next time. What month do you have the most problems getting food? I'll say January because that's when it's cold and hard to get out. How easy it is for you to get food from your local grocery store? I'll give it a 4. And then how easy to get food from your local farmer's market? I'll give that a 2. I can easily get food when I need it. Agree. I find it easy to get food from the following places. Strongly agree for Meijer and Aldi. Martin's, I would disagree because I have to go further to go to that one. Farmer's Market, well, it's only on certain days, so I'm going to disagree with that one as well. And then my last one is, what time is it? And I can type in 10:53. Oops, 53 a.m. And now I can submit it, and that now gets submitted to the selection for that survey when I want to see my responses. Okay, so
We do
I've
have a
now,
couple of questions before
what's
you go
that?
on. I said we have a couple of questions before you go on.
Okay, shoot.
So when you were submitting that, or click on one of those, I think it says clear selection. Once you click on,
Okay, what is your ethnicity?
see, it says clear selection.
Yep.
What does that do?
If I clear that selection, then that means I can just go back and I can do it again, and I can say other, and I can say, I don't know, Dutch, Vanderwall's my last name, / German, or, whatever I wanted to type in there. And if I decide, I don't really want people to know that, then I can clear that selection again, and I can back it up, and then I can go back and I can reselect that. So it just allows you to essentially erase that question only and then do it again.
All right. The next question is a Google survey truly confidential? It gets asked from families often if emails can be obtained by just filling it out. She said, from the last question, I understand you should ask if you are able to use them, but with a Google survey, do organizations actually see all of the emails that the surveys were sent from?
Right. Yeah. So surveys in general are always complicated because if you create them, like, I don't know, let's say you have SurveyMonkey or something like that, you have an option where you can turn off or turn on the IP address. And the IP address is that computer's unique signature for that particular issue or that particular computer. I am a big believer in turning those off where I can. With Google, you don't even have the option to turn it on or off because there's no tracking that you're allowed to do. In other words, while there may be some great big cloud somewhere where Google can track you, I wouldn't know if that's the case or not. You have no way of finding out who sent you what. It's kind of, you're using their forms, their information, and there's no way that you can get that information. Google's confidentiality is actually pretty secure from everything that I understand. And there's no way you're going to be able to ask for those emails or anything else. And so people can feel really secure that you can't get them. They may feel a little less secure that somewhere, someone in the cloud somewhere has access to that email. But the good news and the bad news is that, Google knows way more about you than you want them to know anyway. And they're probably not going to learn anything new from your survey anyway, and probably don't care because there are billions of these things going back and forth. But that's kind of the best I can describe it.
Right. And then last question is, can we get a copy of this survey to send out? as an example?
This particular survey?
Yeah, just as an example.
Probably, because what I'm going to do in just a second, I'm saying probably because I'm thinking this through. How do I do this? So what I'll do is I'll show you how to create a link, because that's what you're really wanting to do, because you want to create a survey and then you want to send it out to a few people to look it over and see what they think and to give you feedback and make sure that it's well written and that people can understand it at a pretty basic level. And then once you're ready to send it out, then you want to create a link that you can then send via email that they can click, and it's going to take them right to this form, the food insecurity survey, and that's exactly what they see on their screen. So if I go back to where we were creating this, first of all, what you're going to see is there are responses right here. And since I'm the only one that responded, you'll see that there's a little 1 next to it. So I filled it out. Responses. Now you can see all of my responses. 100% was over 35 because that was me. What's your gender? Well, that one happens to be male. I'm the only one that responded. What's your ethnicity? Well, that one's white. And so you're color coding based on the colors of your little survey response. But the cool thing about this is look at how nicely this created graphs for you and created these little what do you call them? The little side bubbles that tell you I'm trying to remember what in a survey those are called, but essentially it creates a little graphic for you on the side that allows you to then see what options you've created. And then if 25 people responded, then this pie chart becomes something that's much more complicated. Now, it may be that you decide you want to see it in a different form. And if that's the case, I would need to add more responses, but you can probably do it so it creates bar charts rather than pie charts. And sometimes those are easier to see and to respond to. But since we only have 1, that's not going to be very helpful. I'm guessing we'll be able to change that in options, but I'll come back to that in just a second. Okay, so then that allows you to see your responses, but please be warned that if you created accepting responses, then even the test options that you did when you sent it to your 5 favorite people and they did the answers just to see what they thought, those responses all get logged in unless you turn off accepting responses. Once you turn that off, then that allows that blocks people from responding. So you have to make sure once you're done doing all of your testing that you wipe out all of the people that you did as your test results so that you can then only get the new results from the people you really want to respond. This one here, you can see this allows you, these little dots right here will allow you to get email notifications when you've got new responses. It'll basically say, you got a new response. It'll allow you to select your response destination. You can download the responses into a .csv, or basically that's rows and columns, like if you were an Excel sheet or something like that, or it allows you to print responses. If you go through and you do 5 people that test it just to see how it's done, then I would go in and delete those responses. And when you've deleted them, then that will delete whatever's in there. But be careful not to select that once you've got real, live, actual responses showing up. And create spreadsheet just basically allows you to then, if I created a spreadsheet, then that would create something in Google Sheets that then allows me to see everything in the rows and the columns like you would if you were going to be looking at it on an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so that's how you preview it. If I now wanted to change my settings, then I'd go here. This allows you to collect emails. That allows you then to collect people's emails if you want to, but this is where I would say that you do not want to. You want to give people the option of giving the email rather than collecting those automatically, because I think that that's disingenuous. It tells people that you can't be trusted because you didn't ask them for it and they didn't give it to you voluntarily. You can select that it gets signed in or not signed in. This allows you to limit to one response. That means that a person can't go in and answer the same survey 5 different times on the same computer, so that only one computer response can be given. Now, let's say that they're answering this at a, I don't know, library or something, and there are 4 or 5 people who are going to be answering this, or they're at another agency and they get on the same computer. You may not want it limited to one response. You want multiple people to be able to get on the same computer and continue to answer your survey. The only time you select this is if you don't want people to stuff the ballot, so to speak. And this one allows people to edit after they submit, meaning that they could go back in and change their responses if they wanted to. I'm not a big fan of that. And see summary charts and text responses. That allows the respondents to see what other people have said. And I'm also not a big fan of that. Okay, I'm not going to say any more about that. Now, let's say that we want to then send the survey out to people. So we'll go back to questions. We now have our survey here. And let's say we want to send it. So I'm going to click on send. And this allows us to create our link. And here's where I want to create a link. I could send it to people's email, in which case I've got to type in everybody's email, and I could type in, vanderwa@andrews.edu, and I could type in my friend Dwayne McBride, and I could create this long set of emails that I want to send this all to. But I may say, no, I don't want to send this out as an email. I want to send it out as a link. And if that's the case, it creates automatically a link for you. Now you can see this is a super long link, and if I click on it, I can right click and I can copy it, and then I can paste that into the email that I send to somebody and say, please go to the following link. This is a really important survey. I'd really love for you to fill this out. Thank you so much. But this is really long and you might want to shorten it, so you can click shorten URL, and that turns it into a much shorter version of this. And then you can copy it. And once you've copied it, then when you create a new email, you can then paste it in, or you can paste it into your Facebook. You can share this on Facebook, or you can share it on Twitter. So that gives you some nice options for how you can distribute your form, or you can even embed it into your website. And this allows you to do the embedded HTML into your website. So lots of different ways in which you can distribute the form. You don't want to go to the send option until your form is completely ready and you're ready to distribute it. Once it's ready to distribute, that's when you hit the send option, and that's when you can send it out. And then you'll start getting responses coming in. I generally find that I want to send out the form once and then remind people in about 3 days, and then do another reminder the following week. And just to say, look, I don't know who completed this form, but we'd sure love if you would be able to do this. And if you haven't done it yet, please go in and do it. And I generally find that the first time I send it out, I get the most responses. That's the biggest response day. When I remind somebody 3 days later, I get a smaller response group. And when I remind them one more time the next week as the final reminder, then I get the smallest amount. But at that point, if they're not going to do it, they're not going to do it. And it doesn't matter how many times you send it out. They're probably not going to respond after the 3rd request. But I generally at least want to wait for one extra time.
One more
Okay.
question.
Yep, go ahead.
When you were, I'm not sure where it was, settings maybe. So
Yeah.
an organization can collect emails without the person knowing.
Mm-hmm.
Realize you said we should not mark that, but if the organization did, would they receive all the emails? Sorry for her confusion, is what she said.
Yeah, I think that they would. And you could, the best thing that you could do if you did select that is to tell people that you're going to be collecting their emails. The response receipt lets people know that their email has been collected. If the respondent requests it, or always, you can select that option as well. I just think that collecting emails without asking people is generally not a good idea. And so I would generally keep that off wherever possible. Okay, we need a break, I'm sure. So I'm going to stop talking. And when we come back, let's we can do how to run a focus group. And I promise you I will not go past 11. I know, or past 12. I mean, I realize that it's about 11:07 right now. Do we want to take until 11:15? At least that gives us a few minutes to go and grab a snack if you happen to be at home, or use the restroom, or whatever else you need to do. And then we can start back at 11:15, and I'll totally shift gears on you and talk to you about how to do focus groups. And if you have any other questions about surveys and you think of them, we can also answer those through Amanda at that time too. So we'll see you back at 11:15. Okay, should I charge back in, Amanda, or do you want to say anything else?
Go ahead. I'll finish up at
Okay.
the end.
Okay, so focus groups can be used for both process and outcome evaluations. The process part would be if things are going along and you're wanting to get feedback from your clients or from your staff about how things are going, and you wanted to talk to people in depth. You don't just want a survey, you want to really know what they're thinking and why they're thinking what they're thinking. And so focus groups become really helpful for that kind of process information, but they're also helpful at the end of an experience when you're trying to find out what worked and why, or what was most successful, or what was the most interesting or important about what it was that this particular group was dealing with. And so focus groups are a really good way to bring people together and to talk through more detailed verbal responses. So that's what this is going to do, is to create some basic guidelines for how you would conduct a focus group. So we'll first talk about, kind of what that might be like. I'm not going to tell you about my experience. I've done lots of different focus groups through my life, but we'll define what a focus group is. How do you design questions? How do you recruit and prepare participants? How do you actually conduct it? And how do you analyze the data? So that's kind of what this piece is about. Okay, so appropriate or not appropriate to use a focus group. I'm a big believer in using focus groups whenever you want to dive more deeply into information. And the best way to do that is to ask people questions that don't have simple answers. So that's generally what a focus group is for. 6 to 10 people are probably the right range. If you get less than 6, you generally find that people feel a little too pressured and feel like they have to talk too much. If it's more than 10, then some people just kind of blend into the woodwork while a few others dominate, and it's hard to get everybody's experience and perceptions when you have too many people. So this is an open discussion. A skilled moderator is really important. I would just say right at the very beginning that if you're an agency director, or you're someone who has authority over people in this particular group, that you do not want to be the moderator. And the reason for that is that people who know you have some form of power, for whatever reason it is, will modify their responses. And so a lot of people like to bring in an outsider to do a focus group, or if not an outsider, someone who doesn't have status and authority over the particular group that you're wanting to do an interview with. I was part of a group that one time I found out later because there was another moderator that did it, but basically the person in the group was also, and so this isn't just the moderator, it's also, you don't want to be one of the group members yourself. If you're the director, you have some level of power or authority, because your being there will modify other people's responses as well. So try to keep your hands out of it, other than asking the questions that need to be asked, and then have somebody else do it, other than yourself, because you will skew the responses just because of who you are and the authority and the power that you happen to have. So a focus group is where a moderator encourages discussion. Ideal amount of time is 45 minutes at the very least and 90 minutes at the most. You don't want to go much longer than that because people get tired. They start to drop out either emotionally or in some cases physically. They just leave because it's too much time. So I wouldn't go much more than 45 to 90 minutes. And predetermined questions, no more than about 10 questions at the most. But what you want to do is encourage free-flowing discussion. You're looking for homogeneity at one level, meaning that you want people to be comfortable, but you want heterogeneity, meaning that you want lots of diversity in terms of people's responses. So there's some things that you want homogeneity, other reasons you want heterogeneity. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And generally, if you really want to be good at what you're doing with a focus group, you need to do more than one, usually 3 or 4, to get the responses that you're looking for across a broad range of categories. When you're hearing nothing new, then you know you've collected enough information. The downside of that is the focus groups take a long time to analyze, and so the more you do, the more complicated it gets. What a focus group is not. A focus group is not a debate. It's not group therapy. It's not conflict resolution. It's not problem solving. It's not trying to come together to collaborate with each other. You're not trying to promote anything, and you're not trying to educate anybody. You're trying to find out information from people. And so you want to make sure you are not creating the context where people feel like they're getting, debate going, or that it's therapeutic, or that you're trying to solve problems or anything else. So that's what it's not. What it is a series of questions that you're wanting to get lots of people's responses on. So again, I said 6 to 12, 6 to 10 before. 8 to 12 is probably even better, because if you over ask, then the number of people that you want to come into your group, you're always going to get people that said that they'll do it and then they end up not doing it. So I tend to over invite by about 20 or 30%. And then the number that actually show up is about in the range that you really want to show up. You don't want the participants to see the questions ahead of time. You want the questions to be short. You want them to be focused really tightly on what you're interested in finding out. You want them to be very clearly worded. You don't want them to be threatening or embarrassing, and you want them to be open-ended so that people talk about them rather than just say a single yes or no, or agree or disagree or whatever. You want them to have the discussion. So question structure. When you're asking questions, there are sort of 3 stages that you want to go through when you're doing a focus group. The first part is engagement. That's the stuff that we all know, which is helping people to feel comfortable and to kind of get them settled in. So an engagement question is like, so how are you guys liking the weather that we're having lately? Isn't it gorgeous? And just allowing people just to kind of settle in a little bit and just to kind of get comfortable. And then an engagement question might be something that's really simple that you ask that just helps them to kind of settle in before they get the exploration questions. The exploration questions are the major questions that you're wanting an answer to. And those should take the vast majority of the focus group time. And then the exit question is there anything else that you'd like to add, or anything else more that you want to say? And so that's kind of the structure. You start out with a very simple, broad kind of question, and then you go into a deeper set of exploration questions, no more than 8 or 10 at the most. And then your exit is, anybody want to add anything else that we haven't been able to have a chance to talk about? Okay, let's talk a little bit about recruiting. Now, the reason that I didn't, just to back up just for a second, the reason I don't want to say any more about question structure is that there's so many types of questions you can ask about so many different topics that it's really hard to create sort of options for how you ask those questions. It really does matter, and it is determined by the kinds of things that you want to know more about. So this is really open-ended, and there's no good way for me to say, how do you create a good question? How do you create a not good question? It's basically making sure that they're focused on the areas you're interested in, and also that they're open-ended, short, clear, to the point. Those are all really good types of questions that you want to ask. In terms of recruiting, who do you ask to come to your focus group? Well, it's ideally participants who are comfortable but who are strangers. Now, that's the case if you're doing an outcome evaluation at the end and you're wanting to bring in your clients and ask them some questions. If you're doing a process evaluation and you're bringing all of your staff together, then it might be that everybody does know each other really well because they work together all the time, and that's okay, as long as people know what the purpose is and they have somebody asking them the questions that's not you. Because again, they might feel like there are only certain kinds of answers you want to hear, or that you are biased in a certain kind of way and that you don't want to hear what they really think. You want only to hear the things that, they can only say when they feel like they're being, saying what you want them to say. So that's why you don't want to sit in on those interviews in either case. Okay, so you want some level of homogeneity. Homogeneity basically means that you want people to be similar. Now, in the case of your clients, you generally want to have some broad representation in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, maybe even in terms of the kinds of experiences that people have that they bring. Homogeneity is where you don't where in some ways you want people to be similar because you want them all, for instance, to be part of your client base, for instance. That's homogeneity, because you want the people who are only being affected by the information or the program that you're trying to create. So that's, in the sense, homogeneity. But heterogeneity means that you want some variety in the types of people who are responding, because we know that males don't respond the same as females, and people who are Black or Hispanic may not respond in the same way that people who are white do, or people who are older may not respond the way as people who are younger. You just want to make sure that there's enough homogeneity so that people are comfortable within the same realm, but enough heterogeneity that people can really respond across wide response sets. Sorry, I used a research term. Response set just basically means how people respond. Inclusion criteria is, you want to make sure that you're clear up front when you're creating your invitation so that you know exactly who you want to invite. Over invite, assume that there are going to be 10 to 20% that don't show, and then invite that many more. If you were planning on having 10 people show up, invite 12 or 13. I am a big believer in offering some sort of incentives. You may not be a rich organization, so maybe you can only get some food and offer them some food, but it works even better if you can offer a gift card to thank them for coming. Don't pass the gift cards out until the end. Some people, even more, like to have cash. Again, don't pass it out until they've stayed for the entire session. Otherwise, some people might leave halfway through, or they might leave right after they've gotten the money. You always want to make sure that people know that they don't have to answer any questions, and that they can only respond to those things that they want to respond to. But you'd like them to stay for the whole time. So types of recruitment, there are different ways in which you can invite people. One is to nominate people. Another way is to randomly select from your client base. Sometimes you can invite members from the same group. Maybe those are people who have experienced the same program together. That can be fine. Sometimes it might be the same role or the same job title, or maybe you want to do it across job titles and roles. Or you can just ask volunteers, and you can select that by maybe your website, or sending out emails or other kinds of things. Some other tips: use a form to track your invitations, meaning that you want to know who you invited, particularly if you send out emails, so that you have your selection set in front of you and know who you were asking to invite. And then you can always ask them again if they didn't respond the first time. It's always important to organize your times and your location and the people involved so that you know all of that ahead of time. Organization is really important for creating a focus group. Scheduling a convenient time, that's probably obvious. If it's your clients, as best you can, offering things like transportation or childcare makes it more likely that those individuals would be able to come. I'm a big believer in meeting in an easy to access location, but don't do it in a public place where other people can overhear people's responses. In other words, don't do it in a lobby or don't do it in a place where people are walking by. You do want to do it in a place where people can come and find the place easily. But once you get to that place, make sure that it's private. Give a start time that's 15 minutes ahead of time. In other words, build in a little bit of a buffer that allows people to get settled in. It allows the people who are chronically late to actually show up maybe on time, and it makes it more likely that you're going to be able to actually use your time productively. You want to make sure ahead of time to arrange the room so that it's comfortable, so that it allows people to be able to sit and see each other. Focus groups generally are not set up in a row format. They're generally set up in a circle format, and tables and chairs are oftentimes a really good way to do that. Or you can remove the table and just have people sit in a circle. Arranging for food, I'm more than happy for people to eat food when they're in a focus group, but make sure not to bring things that might be crunchy or crinkly or things that you have to unwrap that are really noisy and loud. I realize that with COVID that sometimes individual items have to be put into individual things, but if you can maybe put, let's say you want to give mints or something like that, you can pre-put them into a cup, or you can put something into a container so that everybody individually has their own. But things like little candies that they have to open and unwrap is crinkling, and you're going to be recording these focus groups, and so you don't want the noise of a chip bag being ripped open to drown out other people's sound. And it's also kind of annoying for people too. So something for them to drink and something for them to munch on is always a good thing. So conducting the group, what are the moderator's traits? In other words, the person that you want to do the focus group, what do they need to be? Well, first of all, you need to have two people. You need to have the moderator who is not doing anything but moderating. That should be the only thing that they do. And the assistant who does not talk, who does not interact in any way except to be pleasant and to smile to people and to, maybe help with the food setup and that kind of thing. But the assistant's job is totally and completely to write notes and to make sure that you're keeping track of all of the information as you go along, maybe to pass out things to people, but also to keep notes. And I'll tell you more about the assistant's job in just a second. The moderator qualities, they need to be a good listener. They need to be able to listen and think, meaning that if they're needing to ask follow-up questions, that they're good at being able to ask follow-up questions. They have to be somebody who believes that everybody has something to share and that they can then ask people to make comments if they've been quiet. Joe, I've noticed that you've been a little bit quiet. Would you mind, do you have anything that you'd want to add at this point? Or being able to gatekeep so that if there's one or two people that are dominating the conversation, that you can say things like, Ellen, I know that you've got some really important things to say, but I'd like for you to hold off for just a little while so that we can include some other people in that group. So it's somebody who is a gentle sort of gatekeeper, or maybe a gentle holding off one person while bringing other people in to make sure that everybody's getting a chance to talk. So it's somebody that has that sort of skill set. It's somebody who's knowledgeable about the topic so that at least the questions that they're asking, they can ask follow-up questions that make sense. Somebody who is not opinionated, meaning that they're not going to put their personal views into the comments and try and shape things in particular ways. They're a position of authority, but they can also relate to the other person, and the person, I already mentioned this, that can manage the group dynamics. So moderator qualities, if you're somebody that's very good thinking on the fly or thinking in while things are going along, that you like people, comfortable with groups, can lead conversations, that's a perfect person to lead a focus group, as opposed to the person on the right. I don't like groups very much. I take a while to think about what I'd like to say. I'm an introvert. I like others to lead conversations. Or maybe you're too talkative. You take up all of the oxygen in the room, whereas you need people to actually help to moderate and facilitate, not to be the one that talks. Now, the assistant traits. The assistant is the person who runs the tape recorder, or even better yet, use your phone and use the recorder on your phone. But I tend to want to make sure that you use at least 2 phones or 2 recorders, because that way you're going to be more likely to be able to, if one of the phones didn't record for some reason, you've got another one. If you're doing things where you want to video, the best way to do it, I've found, is to use Zoom and just set up your Zoom camera on your computer, and that becomes your recording. But I'd also record on your phone as well, so that you've got a backup. The nice thing about Zoom is that also creates a transcript, and that's hugely, hugely helpful, because then you can then get that transcript. You don't have to retype. Now there are going to be all kinds of errors in it, because it's using voice modulation and all of that to try and record it, but that at least gets you way down the road before you wouldn't have been otherwise. The moderator assistant also needs to be the person who takes notes about the whole conversation. You want to have to write the notes out. You could be typing, but I'm generally a believer that the person who's taking the notes is more looking at the nuance of the conversation, or if somebody laughs, or if somebody is, a bunch of people are nodding silently in agreement, the note keeper should be keeping notes about that particular point, because they want to know if there's a lot of people that agree or if nobody agrees. That's the person that tells them that they are actually, there's a lot of agreement, or there are people shaking their heads. That doesn't show up on the transcript. And so it's good to keep notes on those sorts of things. They allow the moderator to do all the talking, and they're both involved in get everyone settled and everybody getting started as well. So that's the assistant's role. Okay, conducting the group, and I need to keep myself on time here. Conducting the group, the beginning and the middle. So to start out, you say who you are, but even better, name tags or name tents if you happen to be on a table. But you can allow people to self-disclose, and some people may not want to give their last name, or they might not want to give us, they might want to give a pseudonym, and that's fine as well. But it at least allows you to know who's talking, because you can link the person's name to that person who's talking. You'll want to have a consent form that basically says, this is the reason that I'm doing this. This is going to be kept confidential. People's names are not going to be repeated in other locations, and this is how the information is going to be used. So I've got tons of examples of consent forms. If people would like those, I'd be happy to send those to Amanda, and she can give those to other people. A demographic form is really helpful to pass around first, just to allow people to select things like name, education level, income, maybe for some people, gender, ethnicity, those kinds of things. And always decide, do I actually need this information or don't I? And if you don't need the information, don't ask the question. But demographic forms allow you then to have that information collected, and then you can compile it, because you really want to know who it was that did your focus group. And sometimes people just don't. It's not easy to know without them saying what their ethnic background is or what their age happens to be. Generally, you read off of a prepared script, sharing the purpose, setting the ground rules, etc., asking a basic icebreaker question that just helps people to get comfortable. And then once you get kind of going, you've got to watch your time and pace yourself, so that if you're asking 10 questions, you don't spend all the time on the first 4 and then end up figuring out, oh my goodness, I've got to hurry up and ask all of these other questions, and then you rush through it. So you definitely want to be careful and pace yourself, so that you're giving a certain amount of time for each question, and giving yourself enough time to finish as well. If the question is unclear, the moderator can then qualify it. You want to remain neutral, even with your body language. Sometimes you're asking sensitive questions, or questions that are awkward or uncomfortable, and you don't want to give people the impression that you disagree with them or that you're uncomfortable with their responses or that you're pleased with what they're saying, other than, can you tell me more, or help me understand more of what you just said. Those kinds of things are really helpful to kind of bring people out and to even ask clarifying questions. That's really, really important. Tell me more about that, or what did you mean by that? Or when you said such and such and so, what did that mean? Can you explain that a little bit more? And then when you're asking other people, you can say things like, so do any of the rest of you agree? Or do you disagree? Or any of the rest of you want to add anything that wasn't said by such and such a person? So you're really trying to get as many people as you can, pulling them in wherever you can, and slowing some people down and opening up the dialogue so that other people can be part of the conversation as well. Dealing with challenging participants, that's a whole training session in and of itself. But basically what you're trying to do is to try to encourage people to give their opinion, but not to dominate the conversation. And some of that you just do by doing gatekeeping and saying things like what I already mentioned, things like, Joe, that was really important. I want to make sure that other people get a chance as well. So I'm going to hold you off just for a few minutes. And I want some of the rest of you, if you could, to jump in and say a few things about it as well. So you're a gentle gatekeeper to make sure that challenging participants don't either over or under or dominate the conversation. When you're ending the focus group, you basically thank everybody for coming. You pass out whatever you're passing out. If it's money or if it's a gift card or something like that, that's when you give it. And then after you're done, you debrief with your assistant with the tape rolling, meaning that you keep your phone recorder on, and you also keep on your Zoom if you're recording with Zoom, so that you're kind of keeping your thoughts recorded at the same time. And then that's the time when you also label your notes, trying to say, for instance, so that you know who said what, you want to make sure that's all filled in as well. And then the hard part, which is the transcribing the recording and inserting notes where you need to. And again, if you can do that on your Zoom and then get the transcript, I don't know how to download those transcripts, but I know that it's possible. That's a huge, huge, huge time savings. Otherwise, you end up having somebody listening to the recording and typing the whole thing out. But that's important, because the next thing you have to do is analysis. You can't just run the group and then say, well, what were my general impressions? To do it well, you really need to do an analysis. And so that's where you might need to delete non-essential words from the transcript, but I'd be careful about doing that, because you don't want to change the meaning of things. So that's only to delete things like and and things that would just kind of fill up space but don't really add to the conversation. You want to assign each participant a label or a number or a name, and then make sure that everything is labeled carefully. And then you do an initial review after you've read through the entire transcript, and then decide to create, or then you decide on how you want to create your code book. Now, the definition, the brief definition of a code book is basically, it's a document that you use to code people's responses that are similar or that are different. So basically, when I'm coding, what I do, and this is a whole long conversation that we just don't have the time for, but basically what a code book does is it reads a sentence and then it says, what theme might I be able to give to that sentence or that paragraph that consolidates down that idea into something that's really small? So I'll write a note in the side paragraph what that idea was. And then I'll read the next sentence or the next paragraph and I'll see, is that a different idea? And I'll write that down. So basically I'm creating a shortened code of a few words, or maybe only a single word, that helps me to kind of organize all of the ideas. And I go through every single line of that interview, the focus group, and I give everything a code. And hopefully by the time I'm done, I'm starting to see multiple areas where codes can be used in multiple times. Because what you're trying to do with these codes is you're trying to go through, label everything, and then organize them so that all of the codes are in one place that relate to a particular idea. So they actually have analysis software that allows you to do formal codes and put things into categories, and then you can sort by your codes. And it's a really easy way to do it, but it takes a long time. And that's why focus groups are not done by a lot of people, because it's just time consuming and you need to know kind of what you're doing in order to do it well. But generally, when you're doing a code book, you should try to have two individuals who agree to what the codes are, and then they go through once a code book has been created, and then they label all of the sentences or all of the paragraphs, and then you can see which codes came to the surface as the most used kind of topic areas and which ones aren't used by very few people at all, or by very many people at all. And so you have the ones that are at the top become the major themes, the major categories, and the ones that are at the bottom, not very many people are talked about it, or maybe only one or two people that are coded. And those you generally don't report back, because you don't really care much about the ones that were only said once or twice. You keep track of them, but you don't necessarily have to report them as being the most important ones. The most important ones are the themes that came out with multiple people and that were said multiple times in multiple ways. So when you do your actual report, you basically are identifying your main themes and your sub themes. And you can see to the right there, the funnel idea is that you start broad, and that the themes that are at the very top are the ones that are said by the most people. And then once you are writing them out, you write a short paragraph that summarizes your findings, and you note similarities and differences, and then add the quotes that give the best illustrations. I call these the money quotes. These are the major findings, and then some examples that allow you to really understand, that Jane said, boy, this was a really great program, and I think that we should do more of these kinds of things. Well, that might be coded under satisfaction with program or something like that, but you'd want to give the quote so that you can see what that theme, satisfaction with program, actually is related to. I realize this is a really hard thing for me to describe, and unless you've actually done it, you can't really know how to do it well, and you kind of need a little bit more training to do it comfortably. But generally, once you've done a few of them, you become pretty good at them, and that's why it's easier to ask somebody to come in and do them and to then create a report for you. And generally, a formal report will include a little bit of background, the methods that you use, the major findings, which are the major themes and the major sub-themes, and then some conclusions, some recommendations, and then an executive summary. So that's what a formal report with a focus group would look like. And bias is always tricky, and we could say lots of things about it, but basically, bias is when you're looking for the things that you hope to find, or you're expecting certain things, and so, wow, there they are, those are the things I expected to find. But you sometimes skew your summaries and your coding in order to make your bias match your outcomes match what your biases are.